AI will simply escape our control and enslave or destroy human civilization. The ability to create these fictions, these fantasies, these images, and to imprison people within them is more powerful than the reality. The truth is a very rare and costly subset of the information in the world.
Yuval Noah Harari is inarguably one of the bravest, most radical thinkers of this generation. More than 150 years after Charles Darwin proposed the theory of evolution and natural selection, Harari, with his first book, Sapiens, convinced millions of readers, including me, that we'd been looking at human evolution all wrong all these years. Since then, his works Homo Deus, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and Unstoppable Us have shaped and influenced widespread discourse and debate about humanity, society, religion, politics, and most importantly, technology and its impact on us. In his latest book, Nexus, Harari deals with, among other things, information networks and AI, their increasing control over us, and how we are being dangerously taken further and further away from the truth. Harari was recently in India to promote Nexus, and that's when we caught up with him. So, in this episode, ET's executive editor Sruthijith KK,
are we losing the ability to have a shared reality?
And its editor views, Indrajit Hazra,
where do you think the overt partnership between Musk and Donald Trump will lead to?
Have an expansive conversation with this iconoclast on information.
Of course, you need to take in some information, but then you need this time to reflect and meditate, otherwise you will never have knowledge.
On governance.
The world has a leader, the United States, that cares only about itself, and it is led by a person, Donald Trump, who cares only about his own power.
On invasion.
The greatest violation of the international order has been the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
And on India.
I think India also has a good reason to be part of the camp of countries that try to restore some kind of order to the international system. This should be maintained.
Listen on. It's Tuesday, the 10th of December. I'm Anirban Chaudhary. This is the Morning Brief.
Yuval, welcome to the Economic Times interview, and thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for the invitation.
Firstly, we'll start with the global AI arms race. You called for a pause in the development of AI and for a global framework, a global cooperation framework to pause it. No such thing has happened so far.
Nobody really expected it to happen. It was more of a PR stunt to draw attention to the issue.
Right. So what would you say, to your mind, are the top risks from AI?
There are risks on two levels. On one level, there is a risk of massive increase of global inequality, both within countries but also between countries. It could be a repeat of the Industrial Revolution, when a few countries lead the revolution, and this gives them the power to dominate and exploit the rest of the world. In the 19th century, countries like Britain and France and the United States, Japan, they led the world in the development of steam engines and steamships and trains and machine guns. This gave them the power to dominate almost all the world for more than 100 years. AI could do the same on an even larger scale, as a few countries, maybe just the United States and China, lead the world in the development of AI. And AI is so much more powerful than steam engines. So this could lead to extreme global inequality. But the bigger danger is that AI will simply escape our control and enslave or destroy human civilization in a way which was unthinkable with steam engines. Steam engines are tools in our hand. Whether it's trains or whether later on even something like an atom bomb, It is just a tool in human hand. Every decision is made by some human being. AI is the first technology in history which is not a tool, it is an agent. It can actually make decisions by itself. It can invent new ideas by itself. So an AI weapon can decide who to kill by itself. It doesn't need to wait for a human to give a command. And AIs could invent new weapons, also new medicines. They can write texts, they can create new financial models, and also new religions. What happens to the financial system when AIs invent new financial devices that are so complex that no human brain can understand them, so humans lose control of finance? And let's say there is a major financial crisis, and no human being, no banker, no president is able to understand what is happening because this is already beyond human understanding. We just give them more and more power in the banks, in the governments, in the militaries, in factories and companies. And you have millions and billions of AIs interacting with each other, making decisions, creating new structures, and we no longer understand the world and we lose control.
Is a framework of global cooperation even possible? You have spoken about the pernicious effect of competition between AI companies. But even if there were a global understanding, countries could clandestinely develop AI for military advantages. There could be rogue actors. So is it even possible anymore to control AI in any meaningful sense?
In theory, yes, because AI has still not escaped our control. We are making the decisions how to develop it. And we can make decisions, for instance, to invest a much larger percentage of the money and the human talent in safety. At present, very little goes to safety. Because of this arms race mentality that everybody is afraid, if we slow down, invest more in safety, and our competitors don't, they will win the AI race and they will dominate the world. And everybody is saying that. And with the new US administration, I think there is very little chance that we will see any kind of global agreement on AI or any meaningful regulation.
What does this mean for the world?
It's very bad news for the world because, the Donald Trump slogan is "Make America Great Again." But the thing is, America is already great. The American economy is booming. You see the rise of US GDP, it's going up, whereas China and Europe are in crisis and they are stagnating, and the rest of the world is far behind. Militarily, US domination is even more pronounced. The US army is far stronger than any other army in the world. The United States is leading in the AI race, so AI is likely to make the United States even more powerful economically and militarily. And if now all this power is in the hands of a leader like Donald Trump, who openly says that he doesn't care he doesn't want international cooperation, he doesn't believe in universal values. For him, it's just America first, the interest just of the United States. It's for any group of people, it's a very bad situation when they have a leader who cares only about his own power. Now we have this double situation that the world has a leader, the United States, that cares only about itself, and it is led by a person, Donald Trump, who cares only about his own power. So this is a very dangerous situation, especially given the global challenges we face. There is the challenge of climate change. What is Donald Trump's plan to deal with climate change? He has none. He simply denies that there is a problem. Again, the image is more powerful than the reality. No matter what ecological disasters happen, people have the ability to say, no, this isn't real. This is some conspiracy. You ask, what is the plan, how to deal with an AI race and the danger that AI will get out of our control? There is no plan. Just deregulation and move faster and faster. And the third big problem is the danger of the collapse of the international system and the spread of war and conflict. What is Trump's plan to deal with that? No plan. His vision of the world, like the vision of other extreme nationalists like Putin, like others, is they envision the world as a kind of network of fortresses with very high walls, economic and cultural walls, that care only about themselves. Now, we've been in this situation for thousands of years, and we know what happens. Every fortress wants a bit more territory and security and prosperity for itself at the expense of the neighbors. And if you don't have any universal values, if you don't have any global institutions, any global norms and values, there is no way to reach some kind of compromise between these different fortresses. It then goes to all-out war. And given the type of technologies we now have, a third world war would be absolutely disastrous for humanity.
Where do you think the overt partnership between Musk and Donald Trump will lead to? I mean, is it going to amplify the problem? Is it going to act as a kind of brake to the system?
I can't predict what will happen in the power dynamics between Musk and Trump. It seems that Musk thinks he could manipulate and control Trump, but politically, Trump has proven to be much smarter than people thought in the past. In a clash between these two very powerful and self-centered individuals, I think Musk is not necessarily correct to think that he will come on top.
India is at a place where we are a strong economic power and a rising economic power. There is a rise in the nationalistic sentiment and the pride that comes with it. There is also a desire for a larger role on the global stage. What is your view of India at this point in history and in its own evolution?
India has certainly become one of the most important countries in the world, one of the leaders of the world, economically, culturally, politically. And I can't predict where it will go. It is a decision of the Indian people and of the Indian government. India is at present behind in the AI race. By itself, it probably has no chance of catching up to the front runners of the United States and China. So it would make sense for India to cooperate with some of the other powers that are being left behind, like Europe, in order to have a combined strategy on how to prevent, the AI frontrunners from just dominating the whole world in a repeat of the imperial age. India has benefited greatly from the era of globalization and open borders and international rules, which is now being undermined not just by Trump, but also by India's traditional friend, which is Russia. So far, at least, the greatest violation of the international order has been the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Since 1945, there have been many wars, many conflicts, but there hardly any case of one country just invading another in an attempt to destroy and annex it. Even say the US invasion of Iraq, that many people say, hey, it's like what Putin is doing. It's not. The US never thought of annexing Iraq to the United States. It's ridiculous. But with the Russians, every territory conquered by the Russian army is annexed by the Russian state. This is old-style imperialism. This is what was been happening for thousands of years. And if we don't stop it, this will again become, the international order will collapse, and all over the world, we will see strong countries just trying to grab territory. So I hope that India would use its leverage with Russia. Again, Russia has its legitimate security concerns, and these should be addressed. But the basic taboo of the international system, that you cannot just invade and conquer another country, this should be maintained.
Now, there's also accompanying the actual wars, there is an information war which is happening. In the Atlantic, I think in October, you had mentioned that you believe the values of people like Benjamin Netanyahu are the values of the Roman legion.
Yes.
While the other side, and I think the questioner asks you, the other side being which you belong to, is Zionist. And I quote, "It's important to emphasize and reclaim this word, which has been vilified, not just now, but for decades." Can you elaborate on that?
So Zionism is simply the word for the Jewish national movement. Zionism claims something very simple. There is a Jewish people, and it has a right to self-determination, and it has a very deep historical and cultural connection to the land between the Mediterranean and Jordan River. These are the three basic claims of Zionism. Now, this does not mean denying the existence of the Palestinian people or denying their very deep historical connection to the land between the Mediterranean and Jordan River. The fact is that there are two people in that land with very deep roots there, and they both have a right to exist in security and dignity and prosperity. The problem, the deep cause of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians is that both sides just deny the existence or the right of existence of the other side. And unfortunately, I see it also on my side, that Benjamin Netanyahu's government very clearly says that only Jews have a right to the entire land. And they deny the rights of the Palestinians. And for me, this is not a conclusion from Zionism. This actually is destroying the foundations of Zionism.
In Sapiens, you talk about how the greatest invention of or the greatest advantage of our species is to be able to believe in shared mythologies like countries, companies, and currencies. With the global information flows, especially on the consumer end, being what it is, a lot of disinformation, a lot of information, but which have always existed, but combined with algorithms that are very powerful, platforms that are very addictive, are we losing the ability to have a shared reality little by little?
Absolutely. The main metaphor of the early internet age in the 1990s was the web. And the idea was that everybody will be connected and will know the truth more easily, and this will spread freedom and democracy and so forth. Now the main metaphor is the cocoon. And I live in a different information cocoon than you. And we live in a different information cocoon than people in China or than people in Russia. So we are actually losing touch with each other, and there is no longer any shared reality. Something that was discovered already thousands of years ago, by Hindu sages, by Buddhists, is that people never really interact with reality. We usually interact with the image of reality. Now with AI, the ability to, again, create images, to create imaginary realities and impose them on people is becoming greater than ever before. It's becoming more and more difficult for reality to break through this cocoon of artificial images. People sometimes have this fantasy that, okay, if this goes too far, some catastrophe will happen and people will wake up and realize what is the reality. It's not happening. We saw it, for instance, with COVID, with this pandemic. We see it now with wars, like in my country, in Israel, that no matter what happens in reality, the ability to create these fictions, these fantasies, these images, and to imprison people within them is more powerful than the reality.
Yuval, if we look at the end of the Second World War and world history in its wake subsequently, we generally saw, by and large, around the world, we saw a rise in the rule of law, we saw a rise in prosperity, we saw the rise in the strength of institutions, by and large, around the world. And all the risks that you just mentioned, it seems like there is a sort of a reversal of a lot of those gains that we had made in the sort of the global consensus. Would you say we run the risk of a descent into chaos?
Absolutely. We've worked very hard to build the global liberal order of the last few decades. It was far from perfect. It had many problems, many weaknesses, but it was better than any other order that existed before. Name the decade in history that you think the world was in a better situation than in the early 21st century? Do you think that the world in the 1950s was better? Do you miss the world of the 19th century? Do you miss the Middle Ages? When is your golden era? And as a historian, I can tell you there was no golden era. The early 21st century, by many objective yardsticks, like the level of violence in the world, like healthcare, was the best time for humanity. And to give just one statistic, for most of human history, every government, whether an empire, a republic, a city-state, a kingdom, more than 50% of the government budget went to the military to pay for soldiers and fortresses and warships. In the early 21st century, the average expenditure on the military all over the world was down to just 7% of the budget, compared with around 10% of the budget for healthcare. This was the first time in history that governments around the world spent more money on healthcare than on the military. It was not because of some divine miracle. It's because of very hard work to build an international order in which countries felt safe. And now this is in danger. We see it in Ukraine, you see it in other places, and as a result, defense budgets are going up and healthcare budgets are going down. If we don't save the international order, if you allow the order to collapse and you don't have any better alternative, what you get is chaos.
Could you talk a little bit about the influence of India and the Indian systems of knowledge and practices on your own scholarship as well as your own practice? In your writings, there are reflections of, say, the Vedantic philosophies. It's quite well known that you spend 1 month or 2 months in India every year indulging in Vipassana. Could you talk a little bit about both this, the India's influence on your scholarship as well as your practice?
It goes together. And for me, meditation is closely connected with my scholarship because it, in a way, purifies and balances my mind and helps me to be a better scholar. As I said before, it's very difficult for humans to actually see reality. And meditation is a training for the mind to just observe the reality as it is and let go of all the stories and fictions and fantasies. You know, one of the most basic trainings or practices of meditation is just to focus your entire attention on the breath coming in and out of your nostrils. And this is reality. The breath is really coming in, the breath is really going out. Now, the amazing thing that I saw when I began meditating 25 years ago is that I have very little control of the mind, and that I can do this seemingly simple practice for just maybe 10 seconds before some thought, some story, some fantasy arises in the mind, and I lose touch with the breath, and I start rolling in this fantasy for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes before I realize and go back to the breath. Now, this is what has been happening to all humans all the time. We try to observe reality, and instead we get caught up in the fantasies created by our own mind. I'm trying to understand the economics of the world, but then some fantasy takes over, and I'm losing touch with reality, and I'm just reinforcing my own prejudices, my own fictional stories. So when I meditate, this is the training for the mind. Let go of the stories, the fictions, the fantasies created by the mind, and try to just see the reality as it is, whatever it is. And it starts with very kind of simple things like the breath. And if you develop this ability, you can bring it to much, much bigger questions of scholarship. That again, you study the state of the world or the history of the world, and you bring with you some kind of preconceived story or fantasy, and you try to impose it on the reality. And hopefully, if you're a good scholar, you say, no, this is my fantasy. I should let go of it, and I should actually look at the evidence. What is the reality of the world?
This distinction between the truth and information, and the wholly adequate nature of information to reflect truth is also a resonant theme in Vedantic texts and a lot of ancient Indian teachings. Have you studied these? Is there any influence of all of these texts on you?
There is some influence, but again, the main influence is from the practice. The problem, as you said, is that we are flooded, especially in these days. We are flooded by enormous amounts of information, and people think the more information we have, the more knowledge we have. But this is not the case, because most information is junk. It's not the truth. The truth is a very rare and costly subset of the information in the world. If you want to write a truthful account of something, you need to spend time, energy, money, doing research, finding evidence, evaluating the evidence. This is difficult, expensive. Fiction is very cheap. If you want to write a fantasy, you just write anything that comes up in your mind. It's very cheap. So in this competition between costly and complicated and painful truth and the cheap, simple, attractive, flattering fiction, fiction tends to win. The truth is very rare. If you want to find it, to get to it, you need to you need to, for instance, build institutions like newspapers, like academic research centers that make the hard and costly work of finding the truth. And if we just invent more sophisticated technology to spread information, we are just flooding the world with more junk. Too much information is not healthy for the mind, and people actually need to spend more time just digesting the information. And like with food, sometimes you eat, but then you have several hours, you just digest. Should be the same with the mind. So of course you need to take in some information, but then you need this time to reflect and meditate, otherwise you will never have knowledge.
It's been a real pleasure chatting with you, Yuval. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was edited by me, Anirban Chaudhary, and sound designed by Amrit Reggie. Tune in to a new episode of The Morning Brief every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday on a listening platform of your choice. Have a good rest of the week.